So obviously this was a topic of conversation pretty much everywhere, but certainly on ESPN FC yesterday, where both Shaka and Craig weighed in. Let's listen in.
I think the better appointment, the much better appointment, would have been Jesse Marsch. I've not seen a lot since that Tottenham. And that Tottenham job was great. And since then, if we've been honest, been bang average. The biggest names with the biggest resumes are not always the best choice.
Come on, that's ridiculous. Jesse Marsch and Pochettino, you're saying just because Pochettino had the chance at bigger clubs, that's why he's more successful? So if you put Jesse Marsch in charge of Southampton, he would have done the same job as Pochettino did?
And it's a bit like saying, oh, let's go and get Jose Mourinho. He's done it all. His resume's better than them all. He would do great with America, with the US. No, he wouldn't.
The US has missed out on one World Cup since they qualified in 1990. Bruce Arena was the coach for that final run-in.
We can focus on Pochettino, but that's giving a pass to the players. The struggles of the United States men's national team go back to the days of Greg Berhalter. Some in our building have called the golden generation. Boy, were they wrong.
You don't need to know the culture of a country. You don't need to spend 20 years in the US or have been born in the US to do well with that national team. I'm sorry, this is not true. This is BS.
I totally agree with Bruce Arena, where I think it's really hard when you don't know the country, you don't know the player, you don't know all the players in the MLS. For a big nation, a coach should belong to the country that it takes care of. For me, that's compulsory.
Okay, so obviously hindsight is 2020. What do we make of Craig's argument, though, that Jesse Marsch would have been a better hire than Mauricio Pochettino?
Well, Jesse Marsch could have been a better hire. We don't know yet, and I think that's really what it comes down to. But
well, wait a second.
Wait, he could have been better. Would have been a better hire.
Can I tell you why I might suggest yes?
Okay.
Because the thing you guys are picking out with Pochettino right now is kind of the vibe, what it looks like he's doing, how hard he's working. When you think of Jesse Marsch, I think of a guy who's uber invested in the Canadian men's national team and Canadian soccer beyond that. Like the press conference that Pochettino missed because he was doing that YouTube game. That's the same press conference with Jesse Marsch head-on attacks the 51st state rhetoric, and I'm sure got a lot of Canadians on his side. At the Nations League, maybe it's not the best example, but he's getting kicked out of the game. It looks like a guy who cares. That is not what we're seeing from Pochettino. One guy seems to be very bought in, Casey, the other guy doesn't.
But there's also a point where you're getting kicked out of a game for something that was...
Totally, he was wrong, and he got suspended for it,
and look, but
it's passion.
And I'm for passion, absolutely, 100%. And I think what we're seeing is we're seeing somebody that hasn't completely committed. And for us, and I think for someone like a Bruce Arena, who was on a particular pay structure, and then you're going, wait a minute here. You're paying this guy and he's kind of mailing it in? Or at least
do players sense that? Will players sense what we're talking about with Pochettino?
100%.
And the other side of that, will the Canadian players sense what we're talking about with Marsch?
Well, I think there could be a part where when you have a coach that comes in and is really super motivated, there's a little bit, okay, calm down here, pal.
Yeah.
And then there's a point where somebody comes in and they're super laid back and they're like, do you think maybe we should take this a little more serious? You only have a handful of camps here.
Yeah.
So I think you got to find the balance. And I think that's where maybe Jesse needs to bring it back a little bit and Pochettino needs to bring it up a little bit.
What's the argument here? Are you arguing that on paper, like Craig was arguing, I think Jesse Marsch is a better coach than Mauricio Pochettino? Because the argument right there is that's 100% false.
Right.
On
I think
paper,
his argument is that in hindsight,
well, you don't know
he
that
would rather have Marsch for this national team.
Because Craig is highlighting the failed Chelsea job, the failed PSG job.
Sure.
We're not going to highlight the RB Leipzig mutiny the players did on Jesse Marsch. We're not going to highlight the failed Leeds.
Right.
So on paper, it's not even an argument. Craig's wrong there. We can talk about what would have been a better fit. But we see now.
I think Craig got caught up in the words of who's a better manager. I think the point he's making is that Jesse Marsch would have been a better fit for this
for the
team.
U.S.
Do you disagree with that?
And that's why I said,
of course, taking into account that it's hindsight, and we got Jesse Marsch in the Copa America semifinal, and
Jesse Marsch had
a CONCACAF Nations League
Jesse
crash
Marsch had a team in Leeds with some American players, and I get the sense those American players did not enjoy playing for Jesse Marsch.
So what you're saying effectively is we're being prisoners of the moment, saying you'd rather have Marsch
I
than-
believe everybody's being a prisoner of the moment when it comes to Jesse Marsch.
No.
And maybe we are being prisoners of the moment from what we've seen from Mauricio Pochettino, because ultimately we will judge him after
That's
the
the
World
point I
Cup.
was making.
But
Is that his best defense here? That basically these games don't really matter if he gets us to the quarterfinal
well,
in 2026?
he's got a few outs here, because he could say, well, I didn't have big-time players I need at the Nations League. If you want me to take
Christensen
this,
says the same thing for Panama.
fine, but Christensen doesn't have this.
Right, imagine. His pool gets depleted. Imagine, it's much worse.
Christensen does not have the same pressure on him because he's playing right now with house money as Mauricio Pochettino. Casey brought up the salary. That's always going to be a massive, massive issue, a cloud over Pochettino because of who he's supposed to be for this national team. So rightfully so, we will be on top of him when this national team does not deliver. But he could also say, I didn't have everybody. He could also say, I don't have these players all the time. He could also say,
Do you buy that? Because as a fan, I say if 15 months out of a World Cup, you're losing at home to Panama and Canada, what you're selling me is that this is part of a learning process
not
that's
selling
going to
you
end.
that.
What is being sold, the hope that is being sold is this is part of a learning process that's going to pay off in the round of 16 in 2026 next summer. As a fan, I don't know if I can buy into that, Seb.
They've not bought
when
into
they're losing.
When you can see the attendance numbers, you can see how people, the buzz around this team, they've not bought into.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Well, but you have to give them a reason. I mean, we went through the same problem, after our poor showing in the '98 World Cup, and then you build a buzz by winning big games and doing things and fans getting back on board.
Could you imagine in 1994 that U.S. men's national team laid an egg? Because this is what it's coming down to. Then 2026, the biggest moment.
To these, here's a couple games.
Case,
this
it
event.
changed.
Now
it changed the course of soccer in this country. The 1994. If it would have been a massive failure, there would be no domestic league. There would be no growth.
The tournament changed.
The tournament changed. Getting out of the group is a big part of that. It's a big part of how Americans perceive the tournament. And this time around, Casey, the stakes are higher.
Did you go to games in '94?
Oh yeah, yeah. I went to a ton of games.
I mean, and I was at games. I was at a game. Ireland, Mexico, and Orlando.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
There was an American guy.
Big Mexico win, baby.
There was an American-Mexican guy that 30 minutes into the game realized he was rooting for the wrong team because one had a green jersey on and he thought that was Mexico and it was Ireland.
And look how far the sport has come since.
And that's what I'm saying. So it doesn't, it was, Americans will come to an event, they'll enjoy it, but you're not changing it. You're incrementally helping. And if the U.S. had a good game or a bad game.
But if there's a big pop, if there is a quarterfinal, semifinal, final run, then I think you have to acknowledge that that's the opportunity for transformational
Matt
growth.
Turner says the reason he started playing at the competitive levels because he saw Landon Donovan score against Algeria.
In the group phase. He got it's just those goalies. Yeah. It's just those goalies.